Now, is there anywhere that you believe I may have been wrong in this argument?
Hi folks, this is Philosopher, and today we have an exciting video of Ali Dawah claiming to have proved God in 5 minutes. Can you believe that? 5 minutes. I can't wait to get through this, and seems I'll have no choice but to end my video with a shahada. I'm buckling up for some absolute top-of-the-line arguments and evidence for God. So let's go.
Okay guys, so I've stopped. What's your name? Bridget and
Dan.
And Dan. Okay, sorry. No, hey, you stopped for my time. Alright, let's start again. Yeah. Okay, so there's impossible existence. For example, you can't have a square triangle, right? It's an impossible existence. You have possible existence and you have necessary existence. Yeah, possible existence are like me, you, and him. Yeah, can't manage over this. Yeah, I'm breaking it down. Yeah? So impossible existence is a triangle. Can you have a triangle circle or a triangle square? No. It's an impossible existence. So we have possible existence, which are people like me, you, etc. Yeah, and then we have necessary existence. Yeah, and we have necessary existence, right? Which I'm going to prove that is God Almighty. Okay.
He doesn't define what a necessary existence means. He simply says that he would prove that it's God. And I think Ali Dawah could do better by defining his terms, but let's continue for now.
So now the example that I'm going to give is the following. I'm going to start off with Google. Google, in order for its existence, it relies on the internet.
Yeah.
Google relies on multiple things and not just the internet. For example, it relies on the engineers that are maintaining it, the data centers where the code is hosted, the power, and so on. There's a causal network of things and not just a linear causal chain. But perhaps it wouldn't matter to his argument, so let's just keep listening.
Okay, so what we say is it relies on the internet. What does the internet rely for its existence?
Servers.
Electricity.
iPad, phone, computer?
Yeah.
Okay, let's say computers, yeah? Computer. What does a computer rely on for its existence? You mentioned it. Electricity. Sorry, my bad. I forgot to screen record. Yeah, there we go. So electricity, yeah, electricity. Now, Google is a dependent thing.
Notice how he catches himself calling Google a being and corrects himself by saying a thing. Almost as though the implication here is that a being has consciousness and a thing does not, even though in philosophy there's no such distinction. I found that interesting in the context of an argument for a necessary being. Seems he already has a conclusion in mind that he wants to reason back to.
It depends on something else for its existence, which is the internet. So Google depends on the internet for its existence. The internet depends on what? The computer for its existence, right? So Google depends on the internet depends on the computer depends on electricity. Now, the electricity relies on solar panels, and us human beings, yeah?
Now, this is such a schoolboy mistake that I had to call it out. Electricity doesn't rely on solar panels and definitely does not rely on human beings. Electricity is a phenomena that naturally exists and humans have merely discovered it. Electricity existed far before humans existed. Although to be charitable, I think Ali Dawah means electricity in the colloquial sense and not a scientific sense, wherein we use it to power our homes and devices, etc. He's being pretty sloppy in his argumentation and definition, but let's grant him that and continue.
So it relies on humans for its existence. Now, what do we rely on? Food, shelter, sleep, etc. Yeah? So as you can see, the chain is growing. Food, sleep, etc., etc. Now, if we have an infinite amount of dependent things, we'll have the fallacy of infinite regress.
There's no such thing as a formal or an informal fallacy of infinite regress. There's no logical contradiction that's entailed in an infinite regress. To say otherwise, Ali Dawah would have to put forward a logical argument for his claim and show that the premises of this argument entail a logical contradiction. But for argument's sake, let's just grant the necessary being and move forward.
Meaning, we need a necessary being for everything to make sense.
Making sense should not be a criteria for anything to be true. Quantum physics doesn't make sense to a lot of people, but it's still based in reality. Ali Dawah seems to be borderline committing the fallacy of personal incredulity, where in the absence of a necessary being, everything doesn't make sense. Just because he doesn't understand it or it doesn't make sense to him, does not mean that it must not be the case.
Now, this necessary being, which has to be independent. So what did we say? We are dependent beings. We need an independent being in order for us to be alive.
Now Ali Dawah makes another assertion that this necessary being has to be independent. But he offers no argument for this assertion. He simply asserts it. How does it follow logically that this necessary being has to be independent for us human beings to be alive? He's just boldly asserting it. It's possible for a necessary being to be dependent, as highlighted in this paper by Paul Gould, who's a Christian theist. So you don't have to take an atheist's word on it. So here's what he mentions. God is best understood as the necessary being, but it is natural to think of abstract objects as necessary beings as well. Again, no obvious problem here. God is a necessary being, and so are the members of the Platonic horde. But as we dig deeper, problems begin to surface. As a being worthy of worship, God, a necessary being, is typically thought to exist a se. That is, God is an independent and self-sufficient being. Further, God is typically thought to be supremely sovereign over all distinct reality in this sense. All reality distinct from God is dependent on God's creative and sustaining activity. Thus, a traditional theist will endorse the following aseity sovereignty doctrine. God does not depend on anything distinct from himself for his existence, and everything distinct from God depends on God's creative activity for its existence. But the view that there are abstract objects that also exist necessarily seems to be a repudiation of AD. The reason is this: it's natural to think that if something exists necessarily, it does so because it is its nature to exist. Thus, abstract objects exist independently of God, which is therefore a repudiation of AD and traditional theism.
That makes sense. An example that I usually give is a seabed. So this is the sea, right? And we have a lot of creatures living in there, fishes, octopuses, yeah? Can we ever have sea and all the creatures inside without the seabed? No. So the analogy that I'm giving here is that the seabed is everything the sea and creatures fall back on, right? So what we say is that because we live in this world and we're all dependent beings, we necessarily require an independent, self-sufficient being in order for everything to make sense.
Ali Dawah smuggles in another property of self-sufficiency by simply asserting it, without any argumentation or justification. This would be partly okay if and only if he means self-sufficiency as a synonym of independence. It would be better if he defines his terms as he goes along and gives argumentation or justification for his assertions, but Ali Dawah seems to be straight shooting from the hip and rushing to confirm his biases.
Right? And you guys know, from nothing, nothing comes, right? Can we ever get something without nothing? Okay, so what we say is, just because we cannot get it from nothing, therefore something has to cause us.
Now, out of the blue, he seems to have switched randomly from the contingency argument to the causal argument. This is really bad argumentation. He doesn't have any structure to his arguments.
Which we call God, in a nutshell.
No, that's not what you call God. Your God has 99 names and attributes. He's omniscient, omnibenevolent. Your God has 2 hands, feet, shin, a face, 2 eyes, and has fingers. I've added a link in the description box below where a famous Islamic Sheikh describes these attributes of God. Again, for argument's sake, let's ignore those attributes and presume that Ali Dawah is arguing for a minimalistic version of God. His argument still doesn't lead us to God. Notice that Ali Dawah merely just asserts that this necessary being is God. He's just labeling it as God and doesn't provide a justification of why this necessary thing is God, as opposed to an initial state of nature or the grand cosmos. The first cause does not imply a God. A necessary being does not imply a God. Here's what the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy has to say about necessary beings in the context of the cosmological argument. Finally, even if the cosmological argument is sound or cogent, the difficult task remains to show, as part of natural theology, that the necessary being to which cosmological argument concludes is the God of religion, and if so, which religion? Rove suggests that the cosmological argument has two parts. One, to establish the existence of a first cause or necessary being. The other, that this necessary being is God, which Ali Dawah has not done even remotely. Ali Dawah still has all his work cut out for him to prove that this necessary being is a God, let alone his God with 99 attributes and so on. Just by calling the necessary being a God is no argument for God at all. It's merely trying to hoodwink his interlocutors.
Now, is there anywhere that you believe I may have been wrong in this argument?
Should I break it to you, Ali Dawah, or have you caught on to the drift?
Oh no, it's the assumption that has a human form, or like that will communicate with us in the first place.
Who's that? You're talking about God?
Yeah,
Okay.
like why would God have a human form, or even want to talk to humans? You know, like why would he specify that Earth is like a particular importance to it?
Okay.
If he's busy building the whole universe, why do we matter?
Now, this is not the best follow-up question by this interlocutor because he has some preconceived notion of God as an anthropomorphic God, whereas Ali Dawah didn't mention any such thing in his argument. So let's see where this goes.
That's a very interesting question. You know, you said something very interesting actually. Have you guys seen that video where it shows our planet compared to the sun and compared to like the universe? Have you seen that video? It's profound, right? So we're like a little speck. So now we don't believe as Muslims that God is a human being. He's not a man. There's nothing like him. Yeah? He's self-sufficient. So we don't say he's a man that, you know, some Christians believe he was Jesus, etc. Yeah? Well, the question you said is, why would he want to communicate with us? Now the question is very important. Something so amazing, which is God Almighty, the fact that he cares about us so much that we're a little speck, but he wants guidance for us, and he wants us to know our purpose and why we're here. So yes, you might say, why would something so magnificent even care about us? But the fact that he cares about us shows about his mercy, because we believe God is the most merciful, he's the most just, he's the most wise, he's the all-knowing.
So now Ali Dawah, after having simply asserted that this necessary existence is God, proceeds to smuggle in all these properties of God into the conversation by merely asserting them. That God cares for us, wants guidance for us, is the most merciful, the most just, the most wise, the all-knowing. He's smuggling in properties at a rapid-fire speed without any backing of those claims, without any evidence. Welcome to the Ali Dawah school of philosophy, where all you need to do is shoot and scoot. Why provide arguments or evidence when you can just simply assert your beliefs?
Right? So, but in a nutshell, do you guys accept that we all have to depend on something independent, which has to be God? Because otherwise, it doesn't make sense for us to be here.
Now again, he's blindly asserting that this necessary being has to be God. Remember, there are two parts to the argument. First is to establish a necessary being, and even if we establish that, the second part is to establish that this necessary being is God. Ali Dawah has not done that. He's just asserted that this necessary being is God. Also, he again commits the fallacy of personal incredulity. He says that necessary being needs to be God because it won't make sense for us to be here. After an underwhelming 5 minutes, all that was proven here was that Ali Dawah needs to take the Philosophy 101 undergraduate class if he's ever going to stand a chance to argue for God. This concludes the first part of this video. In the next part, we'll see some objections by the interlocutor and assess how Ali Dawah engages with them. If you like my work, please subscribe and help me spread the word by sharing it with people you think might be interested. Until then, peace out.